Hello everyone, welcome to the All in Crypto podcast. I am your host, All in Crypto, and today I am ecstatic to be releasing an interview that we were lucky enough to film with Michael Benelak, who of course is one of the co-founders of Mandala chain, which is a very interesting blockchain project. They currently are a Polkadot parachain, and they are already working with governments around the world, financial institutions, and the healthcare sector to harness the power of distributed ledgers to essentially fundamentally revolutionize these industries and how things are done within these industries. Now, most notably, they are working with the Indonesian government to facilitate digital identities. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's dive into the interview that we were lucky enough to film with one of the co-founders of Mandala Chain, Michael. Welcome on board, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, the pleasure is all mine. Very excited to be getting into what we're going to be discussing in this video. And with all my guests, I really like to start off with them and kind of get an introduction into who they are and how they found themselves in the Web3 space.
Yeah, so I'm Australian originally. My background is all in education and sort of BD, business development. I ran a consultancy in my past life, in a Web2 life, sort of forging relationships between Australian universities and Asian universities, kind of trying to link up cross curriculum and flow of students and all that sort of stuff. In 2018, I moved to Bali, Indonesia, just because one, it's a great place, and two, I was doing most of all of my work in Indonesia. And then ultimately COVID kind of killed everything. And so there goes that sort of Web2 business. But I've been in the blockchain space since 2017, sort of bought into that cycle, got wrecked in that cycle like everyone does in their first cycle. But just kind of stuck with it. And then once COVID rolled around and I no longer had any work to do, realized that in Indonesia where I was, there wasn't really any great like blockchain communities or blockchain content. And so I actually started just a YouTube channel with a local friend of mine called Republic Rupiah. And we quickly became one of the largest blockchain media outlets in Indonesia. And so right now, I think we've got about 165,000 subscribers on YouTube. It's all done in Indonesian, all in the Indonesian language. We put out a huge amount of media, sort of 30 written articles a week. And after a year or so, we morphed that into Republic DAO, and we started producing English content as well, which you can find at republicdao.io. But because of our connections with the community and like our space in the ecosystem, my co-founder reached out, who was a guy named Anta, and he's a local Balinese guy. And he's been working in tech and development for the last 10 years across Indonesia, dealing with smart cities. He's got an undergrad in machine learning and a postgrad in blockchain itself. And he'd been actually tapped by the government to start building some applications with blockchain. And so he and I sort of put our heads together and thought, well, hang on a second, he's got a use case and I've got a community. We probably need some tech, and then we've got a blockchain project. And so we sort of looked at what tech we needed to build, and we realized that probably the Polkadot ecosystem was probably the most agile tech stack for what we need to do. And thus we've come up with Mandala chain.
Here you are. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I was watching a previous interview with both yourself and your co-founder. And what was essentially said was, like you had mentioned, your co-founder was sort of approached by governments. There's a question that I really have to ask, and that question is, why on earth would governments approach a blockchain project? What's the kind of reasoning that they came to your co-founder, to start to look to or explore distributed ledgers?
Well, Indonesia is an interesting use case itself. So it's the fourth largest population in the world, with something like 280 million people. It's still a developing economy.
I just want to interrupt you there. I actually didn't know that Indonesia was the fourth largest country in the world by population until I stumbled upon Mandala chain. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's an incredible stat that no one realizes it. But Jakarta is bigger than New York, and the capital of Indonesia. And it's just a massive city, and it's a massive country. And they've been trying to, I guess, advance their economy. They're predicted to have the fourth largest economy in the world by GDP as well by 2035, I believe, or 2040. So they're a growing young economy. but they've had a few issues digitizing. And about 10 years ago, they had a law that went out that said they needed to digitize their economy, but they've been sort of repeatedly hacked. And I think even like last month, there was like a hack of about 45 different government departments, including the immigration department. And so data breaches have just been a huge issue. And so they were looking for solutions and sort of tapped my co-founder, Anta, because he had a blockchain consultancy. They said, hey, look, we know nothing about blockchain, but we've heard it's good for security. Talk to us. And so it's all just snowballed from there.
Wow, because I think a lot of people, I mean, hacks aren't just sort of native to Indonesia. We see hacks all the time, certainly in areas you don't want to see hacks, like the healthcare sector, banking. Obviously a lot of government, various different government agencies are regularly getting hacked, and there's massive data leaks that come as a result of it. I think this is one thing that people are slowly starting to realize, is that distributed ledgers can actually almost completely eradicate that problem if you choose to build those services on a distributed ledger. And this is obviously one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you, and of course get to know a little bit about Mandala Chain, is because that's kind of what you guys are trying to do, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the initial use cases that we're rolling out with, because you don't just go to a government and then the president signs a form and now everyone in the country uses blockchain. It more so works as the bottom up, where you'll get one particular province or local city government or department that will say, okay, we're going to do this. And then they talk to somebody else and you can say, oh, okay, yeah, they're using it. And so we've been able to like roll out and sort of grow the vine throughout the different sectors of the government. And we've got probably like, I think 10 or 11 different agreements now in place with different departments of government and different cities. And as they all hear about what we're doing somewhere else, they're all kind of competitive, but they are all decentralized as well. They all have their own decision making. And so we'll go into that in like the use cases per se specifically, because it's not just one use case. Here's the government on chain. We've had to actually sort of say, okay, this is what we can do for you. Why is that relevant to your jurisdiction or your, I guess, purview? And we've been able to sort of forge a few different use cases, which we'll roll out.
Yeah, so let's go right the way back and really just start with that kind of 10,000 foot view of Mandala Chain. And it really is like a wildfire. I think when the equation's been proven with distributed ledgers, everyone kind of cottons onto it. It kind of spreads just like a wildfire. But if we can go back, we've got to sort of the point where you've teamed up with your co-founder. Let's give that kind of overview in regards to what Mandala Chain actually is, a kind of broad overview
Sure.
of what's trying to be achieved here.
So yeah, we're an EVM L1. We're built with Substrate, secured by Polkadot. We won a Polkadot parachain slot back in April. And so we get to go live with our mainnet or our token generation event, which is coming very, very, very soon. But essentially, the reason why we ended up with the Polkadot tech stack is because we needed something agile enough to be able to build use cases for government. We want it to be EVM compatible because we feel like we want to remove as many friction points as possible. And most like infrastructure right now, whether that's wallet infrastructure or dApp infrastructure, is all sort of Ethereum based or EVM based. And essentially what we've done is we've been able to create an environment where, for those that are familiar with Polkadot, like I know a lot of your community are, you have the Polkadot relay chain, which secures all of these parachains or these like subnets of the Polkadot ecosystem. Well, we will do the same thing essentially. Our parachain will have L2s, for lack of a better word, or subnets or parachains that will connect to our chain. But the difference is that some of these chains will be private and permissioned because different government departments will need to control their own data. But our tagline is that we want to be the chain where government, retail, and enterprise can all coexist. And so they might have permissioned chains where they control their own data, but the interaction or the touch points that they have with people will be on our public chain, on the main Mandala mainnet. And so they'll call, whatever transaction they need to do on their particular subnet, but all of the actual main traffic will happen on the main Mandala parachain. And so that's sort of why we're here and the general bird's eye view of our architecture.
Fascinating. So you're a Polkadot parachain as it currently sits. I mean, Polkadot makes a lot of sense, I think, for a project. One of the biggest sort of benefits, of course, is the kind of security that you inherit. You inherit all that security rather than having to build up your own validator set and kind of go from there. But it's very interesting, the idea, and of course, it makes a lot of sense when you're dealing with governments and enterprises. You perhaps don't want that sort of information public. You're going to want it private. Otherwise, if you're doing this in the name of not having this data get leaked and things like that, you'd be kind of contradicting by having it all on a kind of publicly open um, platform. So, what are sort of the use cases? Let's maybe start with Indonesia, because Indonesia, like you say, fourth largest country in the world in terms of population, expected to grow to the fourth largest economy. I mean, that is huge, right? And I don't think many people know that. You know, I've quizzed a lot of people on just ask them the question, what's the fourth largest country in the world by population? People's guesses are pretty far out. But let's maybe start with Indonesia in regards to the use case that you guys are currently trying to facilitate. A little bit of background on that, and then where we currently are in regards to it.
Yeah, so the main use case and the main sort of Lego block that we'll roll out to start with is something called ID chain. So ID chain is essentially the government appointed entity or state owned entity that owns the .id domain, is who we're working with. And so .id domain mean ending in .id is Indonesia. So I know in Australia we have .au, you've got .uk. So no one's using it though for .Indonesia. Everyone's using it for identity because they just lucked out and it meant that their little acronym that they've got at the end of their domain string is actually usable. Just like .tv doesn't stand for television, it stands for Tuvalu, the Pacific nation. They realized that no one's using it for .id Indonesia and that they can use it for identity. And so they've sort of said, well, let's roll into this and let's make a sort of a Web3 digital asset .id, sort of like in the thread or the vein of like the ENS. And so what we're going to do right now, there's 100 million people that interact with some sort of website that ends in .id, whether that's .go.id for government or .co.id for business and banking. 100 million people interact with that. And so what they're going to do now is that once the chain is live and the .id chain application is live, when people go to one of these portals, they'll be encouraged or prompted to spin up a .id domain. Now, this is a decentralized ID. It's not owned by the government, and this will eventually be available to other people outside of Indonesia as well, where you can control all your own assets, your own credentials, your own data, but you'll be able to interact with platforms and I guess get KYC'd, or you can log in or whatever it might be with just a click of your wallet, as opposed to actually having to provide all your documents and data. And it might end in michael.id or michael@mandala.id. And so, 100 million people are about to get prompted to create one of these. And effectively, that's a wallet that will get spun up on Mandala chain. So we've got a 1% success rate. Well, that's a million users on board on Mandala.
Wow.
A 0.1% success rate. Okay, that's 100,000 users. Last I checked, most of the big ETH L2s have about between 1 and 2 million users. So we think just that one initial use case, obviously, who knows the adoption rate, but they're going to get prompted every single time they interact with this website. And so we can foresee that, we think that we can become a fairly large player as far as active users or active addresses on our chain quite quickly, just with this one use case.
Wow. I mean, it's not just, you mentioned some ETH layer 2s and how many users they kind of have. I mean, those stats, you can have multiple users within, one individual can account for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different users. But if you actually look at applications on Ethereum that have even something like over 10,000 users, it's next to none. So this kind of instantly catapults you guys into being one of the most used chains and kind of applications above and beyond that there is within the Web3 space. I mean, that's pretty groundbreaking.
That's a bullish use case. And when we looked at the data, we thought, well, okay, 10% adoption rates, 10 million users, that's outrageous. And it's kind of intimidating to say that out loud. But the data is the data. So this is the use case, and 100 million people are going to get prompted to come and make a wallet on Mandala chain. And obviously, we're not going to call it a wallet. We'll say, do you want to digitize your identity, create michael.id or allincrypto.id. And so, we'll see what the adoption rate is, but we imagine that it's not going to be a small number.
No, and why would people want to create these .IDs? What's the kind of law for people actually creating one of these? Is it because of the world we're moving towards and how these things are going to be needed, or what's your kind of reasoning behind why people might choose to go down this path?
Yeah, it's all for control of their own data, and I guess if we use this as a foundational layer of our chain, and then a lot of the different applications which we have will be Lego blocks that will build on top of it. So for example, it might be to interact with your bank, that you can all of a sudden just prove your identity and you don't have to KYC, or to open up a bank account. And one of our other use cases is medical insurance and medical health records. So you can control all of your medical health records, and you want someone to be able to access it. We can just, boom, here's my .id. I'm giving you permission to see my medical data. It could be real world assets, because that's going to be a big part of Mandala chain. Is we've got a lot of real world assets being built on our chain, because to interact with a real world asset, you've got to deal with a land registry or a gold custodian or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden they can verify your credentials without you having to give away all of your information, which kind of defeats the purpose of bringing assets on chain if you're just going to be KYC'd up to your eyeballs and everything, and everyone knows your data and you're going to get hacked anyway. So we feel like a lot of the additional use cases that we bring on board will all be done off of this ID standard. And we're pairing with a few other different ID providers as well, like Kilt in the Polkadot ecosystem, to beef up that as well. So we can sort of like Lego block brick that that ID to make it even beefier with different types of credentials as well. You could probably connect your Ethereum name service address as well to that. And just we feel like this could be like to be able to interact with this platform across multiple applications, both Web 2 and Web 3.
Yeah, I think in a kind of ever digitized world, the need for representation that you own in it is of the utmost importance. And I don't think it's something that people really give that much thought to at the moment, if I can venture to say that, but it's something that is absolutely necessary and coming. And it needs to be done in a decentralized way. It needs to be done in a kind of self-custodial way. When you think about real world assets, this is a funny kind of problem is, let's say your house is represented as an NFT. Well, what happens if somebody hacks your wallet? Where do you go from there? Does that individual now own your house? Well, you need some sort of a kind of digital registry, if you will, for human beings, right? We're sort of bringing everything on chain. Well, it's kind of natural and needed to bring us on chain, if you will, to interact with the broader world. And we kind of get into the kind of metaverse, which is what I think this perhaps is infringing on, in a little bit more detail. But it's something that's absolutely necessary. It's something that you guys are actually actively doing. And are you doing that specifically with the Indonesian government? Is it directly with the Indonesian government? Is it an agency of the Indonesian government? Maybe explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so the asset itself, the .id domain system, is owned by an entity named Pundi, and they are a state-owned asset in Indonesia. And so they've been appointed to manage that state-owned asset of the .id domain system. And so they want to open this up to non-Indonesians though as well. But who knows, in time, this might be something you can do to update your driver's license. But as we also get, additional use cases in the Web3 space, it might be a way that you can also sign transactions on whatever X chain. It could be that you use it as a sort of a wallet where you put all your NFTs in. So I really like that modular ability that you can build on top of it, that you've got your base sort of ID standard, and it's a string that ends in .id, will be very modular, and different teams can come and build other use cases on top of it as well, knowing that you don't need to hand over your passport details or do some crazy picture where you hold it in front of your face to sign up to an exchange. But if the exchange accepts the .id login, they can just click, sign a transaction. Here's my .id, boom, I've got a KYC exchange. And so this is the type of world that we think is more conducive to users to come involved in Web3. And so we're trying to make that as seamless as possible, because UI UX is what holds us back in a lot of instances.
Absolutely. And again, I can see what you were kind of getting at in regards to how useful it is, or coincidental, or lucky almost, that Indonesia's kind of thing is .id, very useful when you're trying to sort of solve the problem of identity, and how do you kind of simplify that and locate it. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And sticking on the kind of topic of Indonesia, what else are you guys kind of doing within Indonesia? I'm sure that there's probably more than just this use case.
Yep.
Could we maybe explore that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a whole bunch of agreements in place. Like, we're talking about a lot of data storage as well, which has been a pretty hot topic. We've got a couple of different regional governments now that are moving all of like their governmental document storage on chain. We've got a couple of pilot use cases there. So that's another government implementation.
Why would they do that? Why would they want to, again, touching on that thing that we sort of brought up at the start, I think people are waking up now that there's a problem with Web 2 in the kind of way that it's the stack works. Because there's kind of points where things can be hacked, things can be leaked. Why would a government want to put their data on chain, on a chain like Mandala chain?
Yeah, it's all to do with data breaches. And so this chain itself might be semi-centralized, or they might run like a federated node set. So they would sort of control the chain still, but at least then it's not sitting in someone's server and there's one access point to all of the government's documentation. But someone's going to actually have to hijack a chain itself. And then when they want to access that data or in a public sphere, that chain will be secured by Mandala chain if it's a private permission chain. And if they want to interact with a citizen or a customer or whatever it might be, they can do that on the public network, but still control their own data and not have to worry about if someone's Google Cloud account gets compromised and all of a sudden ministerial documents are now on the internet.
This is huge. I mean, this is when blockchain kind of came about, and obviously Bitcoin really spawned the whole movement. I think people had a really kind of narrow scope in regards to what you can actually use a distributed ledger for. Mandala chain is a perfect example of how real world issues and problems are being solved with the use of a distributed ledger, and it happens to be Mandala chain. This is why we were so excited to get you on, because you're really seeing the kind of it's very interesting to me, and I don't know. I'm assuming it's as interesting to you that distributed ledgers, blockchains, really find themselves at the kind of convergence of most industries in the world in some way, shape, form, or other. It's kind of mind blowing. Bitcoin actually is a very small part of the broader movement.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like just some of the conversations that we've had as well, because we've been able to obviously sign quite a few agreements, and we've been able to build out like a proof of concept for these government departments over the last 2 years. We've got a pilot project going at the moment with a network of 90 banks of how they can sort of secure transactions on chain.
Wow.
All within Indonesia. So we hope now that, we can use this as this being the tip of the spear, and we can show this to other governments. We've just got back from Decoded over in Brussels, and we're talking with a lot of the other sort of Decoded teams and the Polkadot teams, and they're just trying to get in the door at the moment to speak with government. Well, we've got one who's actively, we've actually got applications that are about to go live, in the next 6 months. So, and then we've been lucky enough to speak with 2 other regional neighboring countries right now, where we've started the process of expanding this beyond Indonesia, but we've been able to show them exactly what we've done already. We've published with Indonesia, but that's all happening because there's agreements in place, but it's not going to stop there. We've got 2 others that we're speaking to. And then we hope that, that's going to expand more, not just throughout Asia Pacific, but I mean, it's probably going to be more developing countries initially before we don't imagine that the EU is going to be our next client. But, we hope to get there as more and more countries can sort of prove that this has actually been very beneficial for them. Then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the equation's just got to be proved. And it looks like that's exactly what you're doing, and there's we've spoken about kind of the more immutable than the Web 2 kind of systems reason why this would take place. It's just amazing to me how useful distributed ledgers are. Certainly at the case that you're trying to fulfill. And you'd mentioned healthcare there. Could we maybe explore what you guys are doing within the sort of healthcare industry? Because this is what I'm personally, my background's in healthcare. I've got a brother who's in healthcare. He works for a big company that deals with a lot of healthcare companies or national services. And the reason I'm not mentioning who he works for is because it's kind of a bit of a shambles when you look at things like data storage systems, these kind of things in healthcare. It's very kind of early 2000s. So what are you guys doing with this sort of healthcare sector?
Yeah, the proof of concept actually started because of insurance fraud. And so it was actually because it was driven by an insurance provider initially, that they needed a way to be able to verify that medical incidences were legitimate before insurance could be paid out. And so obviously for that to happen, you need to actually be able to verify someone's medical history. And so how do you do that in a decentralized way? Well, you need to be able to bring some of those things on chain. So we've got a pilot project going right now with about 70 different hospitals. And so we're just trying to, mimic that in a closed loop system right now. So what happens when they can store and record medical history on chain so that it can be verified for insurance providers that X person had a legitimate broken arm. And so that now flags, X or Y payout or compensation or whatever it might be. So we've got a closed loop system happening. We hope that if it's successful over a period of time, we can expand that loop. And then we hope, that can be a standard that gets implemented by anyone, anywhere, at any time. And it doesn't need permission from us to implement. Anyone will be able to opt in or opt out of that system. So it's already been running for several months. And so we'll see exactly, the success rate. And then again, it's all being secured on chain, and will all be sort of available for anyone publicly on the Mandala mainnet.
Wow, wow. I mean, and then if you can sort of solve that problem for the specific use case in healthcare that you're looking at or currently piloting, what can't you then solve? Insurance goes far beyond healthcare. And
Yeah.
insurance is like, I don't know what the size of that market is, but I know it's a large one. I know some people that work in insurance and they do quite well for themselves. So um, the kind of scope for what you guys are doing, I'm very excited to see what's going to come out in the coming months, in the coming years. What's your sort of vision for Mandala Chain? When we're talking about looking 5-10 years down the line, what kind of a role do you see you guys playing? And I guess that's kind of central to what it is you guys are doing.
This is going to be a very strange answer, but I kind of see us as an interoperability layer because the word mandala actually means cosmos, ironically. That's what a mandala is, or the universe or the cosmos. And so we kind of see it as the mandala of blockchains, sort of like that internet. And in 2024, you don't really need more and more and more blockchains. Like we've got many great blockchains right now. Most blockchains are just block space salesmen who are saying that my chain is slightly faster or slightly more secure or have X use case. But ultimately, like we've got some very good blockchains that already exist, and I'm a big fan of a lot of them. And so I don't think maximalism is healthy in any way. I think that people should look beyond just certain different ecosystems. But I could see that we could connect a wide variety of different use cases across multiple blockchains. And obviously in Polkadot, we've got the XCM ability. Polkadot's also now just rolling out Snowbridge and Hyperbridge, so we'll be fully interoperable with Ethereum and all of the Ethereum L2s. And we've got other sort of conversations happening in the background right now about other interoperability layers that we can use. And so I don't think that necessarily there's one chain to rule them all, but there'll be use cases that will require like really heavy levels of security. And so maybe they want to go to Ethereum. That's where they have to be. Maybe it's a very financially based product and they want to only deal with Bitcoin. But it might be that they need some really, really fast transactions. And, we hope to get our block time down to at least 2 seconds, which we can now do with the Polkadot stack. Because one of our main use cases is also a point of sale where we hope that through an app, people will be able to pay for goods and services throughout Asia. Many people use QR codes. And so you pay for literally by scanning a QR code, and there's a real-time transaction that can settle on chain. We're piloting this at the moment as well on Mandala. So if someone's got coins on X chain and they want to pay for something, that Mandala can be sort of that interoperability layer that allows them to pay for whatever they want to pay for at their coffee shop using a QR code, but they've only got coins on some other chain that's not part of our ecosystem, but we can be an interoperability layer as well, just like what we're doing with all of these different government networks, private and permissioned. But again, the tagline is where Mandala is where government, retail, and enterprise can all coexist.
Wow, I absolutely love that. And I want to just sort of bring up a point that you touched on there in regards to Mandala's role within the sort of Web3 space. So not only are you kind of a very much connective tissue in regards to the corporate government enterprise world, you're also perhaps a connective tissue within the sort of Web3 space. What are some of the use cases that you guys see Mandala Chain playing in regards to the Web3 space?
Well, I mean, like we don't anticipate that we have like our particular solution and then you've got to come and change network and come to our chain to use that solution. That's not going to work. So it should be that you could be on any particular chain. And if you're trying to sign a transaction for your .id, well, you should be able to do that from any chain. And there's all sorts of technology around this reality, account abstraction and all sorts of different things where you can control wallets on different chains from one particular wallet on another chain. And so really what we would love to see is that people can use the services that we've got for government and retail and enterprise on any chain. And it might need to send a transaction cross-chain to Mandala, who can be interoperable with a particular like government chain, which is secured by Mandala or not secured by Mandala. And so, that whole level of like you said, connective tissue is a really great word, that there'll be some sort of central meeting point of the Mandala mainnet, but people might not actually really know that they're dealing on Mandala in the future. It might be that they're on Ethereum and they're trying to use a .id to sign up to an exchange because they want to, buy more ETH. And so they need an exchange account. And so, but they've got a .id connection because some wallet that they use has adopted that standard. And that call would go through Mandala, but they don't necessarily even need to know they're using Mandala chain.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the possibilities really are endless. And I think that's very much how a technology should be. People should be using it without really even knowing they're using it. I'm sure 99.8% of people that use the internet don't really think about all the infrastructure that goes into it, right? Or when you're driving your car, you're not thinking particularly about just how, your gearbox is working or your engine's
Yeah,
working.
yeah.
So I love that. This technology's got to be easy to use, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember being a 13-year-old and like, I'm not a car guy, but I remember being a 13-year-old and like saying to my dad in the car, like, Dad, do you know there's explosions happening under this engine, underneath this hood? And just being amazed by it. But, we take for granted so many things around us about how they actually work. And, in blockchain, you've got to be fairly tech savvy or fairly interested in the tech right now to, remember your seed phrase or to be able to look up a transaction in whatever block explorer you use. It's very, very niche still. And for it to not become niche, we're not going to bring people and educate them to come and be more like tech savvy like us. It's got to go the other way. So UI UX is going to be very seamless. And that's the same with whatever application you're using. Like it can't be a $30 transaction and a 10-minute wait time so I can log into some website. Like that's not going to happen. That's very broadband. So we do feel like now that we've got a lot of really great, like real world partners, this is not real world asset per se, this is real world partner. And it's real, like, you got, a real government of a real country, a really big one who's building applications now. We see, hopefully this is only the beginning, and we would love to see many, many, many governments not necessarily have to come and build on Mandala. They might want to build on their own tech stacks or something more regional based to them. But if we can provide some open source technology that gets adopted, well, that's great. We're really excited, and I think the world's a better place as a result.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on that. And where's sort of Mandala chain at the moment? And what can we maybe look forward to in the next sort of 12 months? You've mentioned a lot of kind of pilots and programs that are currently going on.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot as a result of that to look forward to and kind of expect within and beyond the next 12 months.
Yeah, our mainnet is about to go live. I'd say in Q4. We have our TGE like very, very, very soon. And so the first initial applications will be available on chain. You'll be able to start crossing between different applications. The normal sort of DeFi services will be available. And we kind of think about like a blockchain. Like I said before, blockchains are selling block space. Well, a blockchain works the same way that a mall does. And a mall is not anything without its shops or its stores inside it. And most malls have an anchor tenant. And that might be a department store or a supermarket or whatever it might be. But because there's foot traffic, other people want to come and open up a store there too. Well, our blockchain, our mall, our core tenant will be a government. And there'll be a lot of foot traffic that will come as a result of that. And so we're talking with a lot of teams and builders who are looking at deploying games or DeFi applications or deep in projects. And like I said, real world assets is going to be a big one for us. We've got two really big real world asset projects looking to deploy on us. And so in the early stages, there'll be a lot of like traditional blockchain experiences that will happen on Mandala chain. The first initial sort of ID chain is looking like the back end of the year, start of next year, when that will actually be deployed on chain. But yeah, we're finalizing the little screws and bolts on all of the testing of everything. Chain will go live very soon, TG very soon, start of Q4. And so people can come and start getting involved in the community and sort of watch the journey happen in real time.
Yeah, I'm certainly going to be taking part in that. And that brings me perfectly on to where people can go. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be very interested in regards to what you guys are doing and kind of wanting to follow along with the progress that you're making. Where's the best place for people to go to kind of keep up to date with all of this, to join the community and to sort of get on board with what you're doing?
Yeah, you can come to Twitter X at Mandala Chain. You'll see the logo here. That's the logo that you'll see. Just at Mandala Chain on Twitter. We do have a Discord. We do have a Telegram. Come get involved. You can ask as many questions as you like. We've got a lot of community that's already existing right there now. There'll be lots of things happening and lots of announcements, especially over this next month. We're the host of Polkadot at CoinFest Asia next month in Bali. So we've got a lot of the Polkadot ecosystem and partners that will all be out there, which will be producing a lot of content and announcements around. We do have a Polymech round going at the moment. For those that are familiar with Polymech, which is a sort of a crowdfunding platform inside the Polkadot ecosystem. But yeah, and just keep your eyes peeled because our TG event will happen, very soon, Q4. It's probably as specific as I'll get.
Yep, fantastic. Very much looking forward to it all, guys. We'll leave links to all of that in the description. The last thing for me to ask you, Mike, is where do you see the cryptocurrency space as a whole in the next 5 years?
Bullish. Like I'm very excited. Like you and I, people all over the world are committing their lives to this technology because they can see how revolutionary it is. I don't see how this doesn't become so mainstream that it just becomes an everyday part of all of our lives. Like, how many times have we tried to kill and ban Bitcoin in certain Asian countries? Like on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again. And not to mention about what's going on in the US at the moment. So I think the technology is here to stay. It's only going to get better, faster, cheaper, more integrated in all of our lives. It's growing at that exponential rate, as Raoul talks about, faster than the internet itself. So I don't think it's going anywhere, and I think that the early adopters will be rewarded, and there'll be many great businesses that are built on top of blockchains and blockchains themselves that will be built. So I think it's cliche, but I think the next 5 years it's the future. It becomes the present, and so very excited for what's to come.
Yeah, and I'm sure Mandala Chain is very much going to be a part of that, perhaps in a very big way. So the last thing for me to do is really say thank you very much for coming on, Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really do love just how Mandala Chain really showcases the broader application for a distributed ledger in solving real world problems. And I'm very excited to sort of watch the journey that you guys are now on. So a massive, massive thank you from myself, from my subscribers for coming on the channel. Thank you very much, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having us.